Hey there, everybody. So, I kind of wanted to start maybe doing some informal videos on the basics of ISO 9001, maybe AS 9100. And I was going to put together a whole, convoluted set of videos or whatever. But I'm just going to start talking about it and see how that goes instead, because it's faster. I don't have to do so much preparation, etc. But where this is coming from is that I'm just a little bit surprised that it's 2024. The ISO 9001 standard was written in 1987, and people just don't get it. They just don't understand it. And I don't understand that part. But so there's something there's a knowledge gap there that needs to be filled, and so maybe this video and a couple others will try to do that. Plus, it's free, so that's good. But I'm not quite sure why people aren't getting it, and so I want to start with like the absolute basics of ISO 9001, and go from there. Yeah, the other thing is I'm surprised at how many consultants and quality managers don't understand this. And to a great extent, this is not their fault because ISO's done such a terrible job of writing its standards in a way that's understood. And the material that they put out in support of it, like the ISO 9000 standard, 9000, I'm sorry, not 9000, 9004 standard, and all the supporting material is like often worse. It's worse. And so much of it is because the people writing it are so proud of themselves, and they're writing it in a way that doesn't show any humility. There's no humility there. They're not saying, hey, you know what? Let me put this in a way, let me explain this in a way that I think just some random person on the street is going to understand. Instead, they want you to understand how very intelligent they are. And so they're going to talk like lawyers, right? Or academics. And you got to admit, it's 2024. The standard came out in 87, and people don't understand it. You're doing something wrong. What are you doing wrong? So maybe change your tactic. And it's not working. And they're not doing that. So let's approach it that way. All right. Let's see if we can just explain it in a way that's easy to understand for anybody. I'm going to start by this. Okay. First of all, what is a process? I'm going to focus on that first, and then this is going to make sense in about 5 minutes. People don't understand what a process is, and that has been in the standard since 2000. So we're coming up on 25 years of this, and people still don't understand it. A process is an activity that you do. It's something you do. Now, we could get into all fancy definitions. It converts inputs into outputs, all that stuff. Who cares? It's just something you do. I walk to the store. That's a process. I breathe. That's a process. Right? I eat food, it's a process. I go vote, I pay my taxes, it's a process. All of that stuff's a process, right? So now in the context of ISO 9001 or AS 9100, right, you understand what processes does your company do? What do you do? And understand that there's sort of guardrails. There's a goalposts, I guess. There's a beginning and an end, right? It starts with how do you get the work? And all the activities you do until you deliver the work, and then collect some data afterwards. So, first it's going to start with your sales. How do you get work? How do you get customers? When the customer contacts you, what do you do? How do you accept the order? How do you reject the order? Right? Maybe they come to you and they say, I want you to build me something. You say, well, we don't do that. So you reject it. Or they say, I need you to do something. You say, oh, we do that. Yeah, we'll take that. So you start with that. How do you get the work? And then all the activities your company does to satisfy that order. Do you have to buy stuff? Do you have to buy raw materials? Do you have to buy outside services? Do you have to hire people? Do you have to buy equipment? Do you have to write procedures? All the things you do. What are you doing? And don't do it because the standard tells you to do it. Just ask yourself, what do we do now? What are we doing? How do we make the product or deliver the service? What do we do? All of those activities up until the point now you say, okay, how do we deliver the product? Or how do we deliver the service? And then what do we do afterwards? What data do we collect so that we can learn and fix it and constantly improve? And that's it. Those are your guardrails. Those are the things we care about. All the stuff in the middle of those. You don't care about anything outside of that. And you just write it down what you do. Don't look at the standard. Don't read it. Don't get confused. Don't read any books. Write down what you do. And then you're going to see that you have a list of processes. Now, the processes are the things you do, right? They're going to look a lot like departments. Processes often look just like a department, but I want to pause on that. A department in your company is usually, first of all, a physical space. It's a room or an office or somewhere. It's a set of, there's a cubicle farm or something. It's a place, right? And there's people in it. The process is not about the place or the people, right? Football is a process, but the team is the people. The umpire, the referee, all these people, the umpire in football, you know what I mean? the referee, they're people. They're not the process. The process is football. Then you create these artificial things that go in there. But when you start to map out your processes, and I say that, don't map it, I mean just list them, you're going to see it looks like departments, and that's normal. Except there's exceptions. Sometimes there could be a department that has its feet in a number of processes. And QC or QA, quality, is often one of those. The inspectors, they may be doing inspecting at receiving and helping that process, and they might also be doing inspecting at manufacturing. And so I typically don't treat them as a standalone process. I embed them in the others, but you can decide all that stuff. But at the end of that, you're going to have a list of your processes, the things you do. Again, from the point where how do you take a job to all the work you do to deliver it, and then how do you collect data to find out whether or not you did it right or not. Now here's the thing. You've got a set of processes. The processes are all of these things that are just, laying out there. It's like a deck of cards that's been thrown on the floor. Collectively, pay attention now, collectively those processes are a system. A system is the word we used to address all the processes taken together. So if you have 10 processes, collectively you have one system that's comprised of 10 processes, or 15 or 4 or whatever. That system is your quality management system. That's your QMS. A quality management system is the set of processes that you do. Now it's a quality management system is a set of quality management processes. But that confuses people because then they say, well, purchasing's not quality. Don't worry about that. It's all the stuff you do. But your quality management system is the set of processes that you do in your company. And that's it. And that's the point that they failed in explaining ever since the standard came out. People don't understand that. You have one system, a quality management system, in ISO 9001 and AS 9100, right? And it's comprised of the processes. You determine what those components are. All it is a set of words, right? System is a hierarchy. There's a system, and then you have a set of processes. Okay? That's how it works. Then the thinking is, if you manage the processes, you ensure the quality of the system itself. And if you do a very good job managing each one of your processes, it means your quality system is very good, and therefore you're going to generate a high quality product or service. That's the goal. That's the dream. You manage each of your processes perfectly. It means your system is perfect, and therefore the quality of your product and service will always be perfect. Now, we don't achieve that because we're humans and we screw up stuff, right? But that's the thinking. Focus on each of the processes, make sure they're doing their work perfectly, and then each one of those, once you get all of those working, your system becomes perfect and your quality of your product or service becomes perfect. Then if things aren't going right, you're going to know, rather than just the old days of saying, I don't know, we got a bunch of defective product. No, if you're measuring your processes, you're going to know immediately in real time, that process is producing defective product or is not doing its function properly, right? Let's fix that, just that little piece. I don't have to worry about the whole system. I'm going to fix the piece. Imagine this too, like you feel sick and you go to the doctor. And if the doctor just said to you, oh yeah, you're sick, Well, that's not useful, right? That's not useful. That's the same thing with a quality system versus process. The doctor needs to find out what part of your body is sick. Is it your leg? Is it your lung? Is it your eyeball? What's wrong with you? And then they fix that to make the system, which is your body and your health, better. That's what you want to do with ISO 9001. Divide your company into processes, understand collectively that's a system, then manage each one of those processes independently. So this method of thinking that, you divide your company into things you do and collectively they're a system, and if you fix each one of those things you do, it'll ensure your company and your quality, et cetera. That's it's been around for a long time, but they do a poor job explaining it in ISO because the authors of the standard themselves didn't fully understand it. They had a few people who did, and they would write a couple paragraphs in the standard, and then you had somebody who didn't understand it, and they would add in paragraphs that contradict. A huge problem with ISO 9001 is the idea of a quality objective. It's just absolutely bizarre. And this is why you and other people are confused by this, right? So you start out in clause 4 with the process approach, in clause 4.4, the process approach. And they start to go down that road of dividing the company into processes and understanding the processes are a set collectively or a system. And then it says you're going to measure and monitor those processes. They never come out and explicitly say the reason you're doing that is to determine the health of the system. It's kind of implied and you read between the lines, but they never just say it. They just need to say it. Hey, divide your company into things you do, measure each one of those independently, and that will determine the health of your system. If 50% of your processes are sick, then your QMS is 50% sick. If one of your processes is doing poorly, then your QMS is doing pretty good with the exception of that one. If all of your processes are doing poorly, your QMS is terrible. And they should just say that. Put that in the standard, right? And they don't. Then they make things worse. Then you jump further into the standard and they start talking about quality objectives. Quality objectives, apart from the processes, breaks the whole system. You don't do that. You've already determined in clause 4, we're going to have processes and metrics. Those are your quality objectives. So people get confused when you come back later and say, oh yeah, by the way, create other quality objectives. Well, for what? That doesn't do any good. So what companies do then is like they'll have a scrap rate. Well, why is your scrap rate high? If you just set a scrap rate, but it's not attached to a process, you don't know, you just know you got scrap. You don't know which process is responsible for that. So you find the processes that could generate scrap, and you create a scrap rate process for those, you create a scrap rate objective for those processes. Then when they're not meeting it, you know that's exactly where the scrap's coming from, and I don't have to investigate. So the standard got very confused, and they're not going to fix this, by the way. They're leaving it in the standard because the authors are the current crop of authors are even dumber than the last batch. They don't get it. So they're still going to ask for quality objectives, which confuses the whole thing. You break the whole idea of a system being a set of processes. Measure the processes, you got to determine the health of the system. And you shouldn't be applying separate quality objectives. That's why I tell my clients just ignore that clause. If you've done 4.4 properly, the process approach, and each of your processes you have KPIs or something to measure how well that process is doing, you don't need to do quality objectives. You've done it. You skip it. Ignore it. Because it's just confusing. And a lot of consultants don't understand that. I'm still seeing to this day. So what happens is I get called in on clients, right, who they say, and this happened just 3 times in the last 2 months. 3 of my clients came to me and said, we had a consultant and we just weren't getting anywhere. They didn't get anywhere. Or the guy charged them a lot of money and they had nothing. Or they got beat up by the external auditor. So they hire me and I go in and I say, well, here's one of your problems. They didn't implement the process approach. There's no, or they did rather, but there's no objectives tied to the processes, right? They had a bunch of processes, but there's no objective. And then they have some kind of quality objective over here that doesn't mean anything. So we go in and we kind of fix that, right? So I mean, it's a very common problem. If you understand what I just said, though, and you're going to have to ignore a lot of the language in the standard because it's super confusing. That will start to build a quality system that works. So identify your processes, understand that collection now is your system, measure them individually in real time, create a dashboard or something, which is why, by the way, you don't want to get crazy having 20, 30 processes. Okay. And I'll just tell you now, an average number of processes, if you're a very small company of 5 employees or so, you probably have about 4 processes. If you're around, 50, 75, you'll probably have maybe about 8 or 9. And if you're very large, like a SpaceX, you'll have about 18. If you've got more than 20 processes, there's something wrong, unless you're Boeing. Unless you're Boeing size, then no, something's wrong. But that gives you an idea on how many you should have. You break it up into manageable chunks and then set KPIs and measure those. And you assign the measurement of those KPIs to the process owner. You don't do it. Make them do it. They got to measure their own work. And then they're going to have to report when they're not meeting those objectives. And that's how it works. So that I'll end it there for this first video. But I just wanted to go over that basic part. And to understand it, again, you're going to have to ignore like the structure of the standard, the whole context of the organization thing. And we'll get into, maybe I'll do more videos on that. But I just wanted you to understand that because it's such a basic thing that if you don't get that, then your quality system's going to be terrible no matter what you do. So thanks.